The Persian Empire was slowly bleeding to death. After the long reign of an aging king, the realm had splintered into a disorganized and fractious quilt of rebellious nations. Provincial governors were running massive mercenary armies like independent monarchs with no regard for the capital. The royal court itself had become a viper's nest teeming with deceitful princes and crooked courtiers. The old king had lived for far too long, and with each vulture circling the throne like vultures waiting for the ultimate prize, he had many sons. Among them was a younger prince. He was a man of terrifying ambition and cold, ruthless brutality, cold-blooded cruelty which was as cunning to be pitiable as something human. He understood the empire was on the brink of complete demise, and he thought only an iron-hearted monarch could put the world back under control. He was resolved to be that ruler, no matter what cost. I am Tsar, teaching the common man about our history. Since he was not first in line for the throne, the prince was also well aware that he would have to cut his path through the blood of his own family. He waged a brilliant, dark campaign of psychological warfare and silent assassinations of his older brothers. This plan involved the eldest and natural heir, whom they manipulated into joining a treasonous plot against their father. Once the plot was revealed, the eldest son was executed for his betrayal. The second, and more gentle and popular, prince, loved by the common people and nobility alike, became a perfect target. The harsh young prince went on a campaign of whispered threats to his gentle brother that the enraged old king would come and torture and kill him. Driven insane by fear and despair, the beloved prince took his own life by drinking poison. A third important brother simply in the dark was murdered. When the old king finally found out that his favorite sons were killed, the sense of shock and overwhelming grief cracked the heart open. He passed away a shattered man, leaving the one other surviving mastermind to take the crown. As the winner, the prince crowned himself Artaxerxes III. He did not celebrate his rise with extravagant festivals or pardons. Instead, he commenced his reign with his first of its kind, unprecedented violence. Aware that provinces' rebel governors could attempt to use a surviving royal relative to undermine his rule, he undertook an organized slaughter of his entire extended family. Dozens of their uncles, cousins, half-brothers, and nephews were gathered, executing without mercy. Even the royal princesses were not insulated from the purge. The new King of Kings wanted to send from the edges of the world a message of terror that would scream like a wave over a shipwreck. The days of a weak, forgiving throne ceased. With his hold on the capital taken with only terror, the newly crowned king turned his horrifying eyes to the crumbling fringes of his empire. His highest obsession was to reclaim the borders of the state to the vast size they had once maintained under his legendary forefathers. And Egypt was the most obvious insult to Persian pride. Now the affluent land of the pharaohs had successfully revolted for decades, a great rebellion, a defiant, independent nation that dared to mock the Persian throne. The king decided that Egypt had to burn, but before he could march his gigantic armies across the desert sands, he would need to protect his very own territories in the west. The powerful governors of the west coast were still in revolt, and armed in large part with Greek mercenaries. Gold from abroad was heavily backed. The king came down a heavy-handed, unyielding royal decree which commanded all provincial governors to immediately disband their private mercenary force. It was a direct challenge to their power and intended to force their hand. When it reached the most arrogant of these governors, and they refused and raised the banner of rebellion, the king did not panic. He quietly assembled a gargantuan imperial army and marched west. Where his father had used bribery and guerrilla tactics to win his wars, this new king was a harsh military pragmatist. He plowed the empire's great wealth into employing the superbly best Greek heavy infantry money could afford, and paired them with the vast numbers of his own native cavalry and archers. The subsequent conflict in the western provinces was a brutal, ugly affair, but the king's raw ruthlessness and enormous resources slowly crushed the rebellious governors into submission. The vast wealth of the Nile had been lost to the empire for over half a century, and the pharaohs proudly displayed their independence, making fun of Persian kings. The king brought forth the King of Kings, bringing to light an enormous host, a terrifying mix of the elites of Persian cavalry and the thousands of battle, prepared Greek warriors. He marched with this large force through the merciless desert sands, fully expecting the stubborn Egyptian kingdom to be devastated at the sight of his banners. But the desert and the river knew better. The pharaoh had been preparing for this moment for years, heavily strengthening the sinuous banks of the river delta and hiring his own brilliant mercenary generals. The invasion itself was a disaster. The Persian forces could no longer make it across the treacherous, flooded waters of the Nile. Any movement across the heavily defended surface was met with fierce resistance and bloody repulse. The Egyptian defenders were fighting for their survival and used the twisting marshes to ambush and bleed the massive Persian war machine. Sickly, devastated, and humiliated by a recalcitrant foe, the King of Kings was compelled to make the painful choice to withdraw. It was a gut punch against his aura of invulnerability, for a sovereign whose entire reign was premised on the monstrous belief in absolute power. Exposure of weakness was the most lethal poison. The word of the great king's humiliating retreat spread like wildfire across the empire. Suddenly, to the subjugated nations, the purportedly invincible Persian throne appeared to be frail. Seeing a rare chance to escape the excessive taxation and harsh policing by the crown, several important areas took up arms in revolt. The most dangerous of these revolts sparked off in prosperous Mediterranean coastal areas and the island of Cyprus. Sidon, the wealthy city of merchant culture, had grown up in contempt to the arrogance of the Persian governors who dominated her borders. The king of the city would declare independence, burning the Persian cavalry's feed, razing royal properties, and slaughtering imperial officials at the gates of his city. To avoid the inevitable fury of the King of Kings, the ruler of Sidon forged a desperately ill, fated pact with the very chief who had just vanquished the Persian army, the Pharaoh of Egypt. Delighted to keep the war safely beyond his own territory, the Pharaoh dispatched thousands of elite Greek mercenaries, led by a scheming general from the island of Rhodes, to protect the rebellious city. For a brief moment the city of Sidon was a center of defiance, a wealthy fortress protected by a huge fleet and heavily armed foreign forces. But they had dangerously underestimated the pure, frightening determination of the Persian king. He did not dispatch a governor and a proxy to manage the rebellion. He assembled a larger army, taking away from his eastern provinces their best officers, and marched in person to exact a monstrous retribution. As the huge Persian host darkened the horizon, the scale of the king's revenge began to loom terrifyingly clear.